Welcome to part one of a series dealing with slave positions and etiquette. The goal of this is to hopefully have been a number of classes, especially if you've been trained by a slaver, a good slaver, where you have been taught how to do the slave positions and a number of other things. The problem is, A, most girls don't get that training. B, I'm not so sure. Well, I'm not going to say that. I'll ignore that. And the point is that I'd like a video version of this, just not in writing. Many people hear it said, they don't see it. And if they see it, they don't know how to do it. Now, caveat, I am going to put the positions into a box at a location I'll put on the video. You'll be able to go there, you open up contents, you check out the kneeling positions. I'll start putting other stuff over there too. It's at a place where I store things. You won't miss it. It's going to have a boar's and last, I forgot the name of it. You'll see an animal head on the top, and the walls will be bright green. It can be seen about 15 feet away. You really won't miss it. Let's start today, please. Speech and position. Man by heart, man by man, heart by heart, the fury grips the host, the blue slave in Bluetooth. It, of course, to the thronged warriors, it seemed tangible thing, communicating itself from one another. It was almost as though one could see it, but one could not see it, only its effects. I could trace his passage. It seems first a ghastly inflection, a plague, which seemed like a fire, invisible, consuming. Then it seemed like the touching of these men by the hand of God, but no gods I knew. None to whom a woman or child might dare play, but the gods of men and the gods of Thorfast land, the dread harsh divinities of cruel north, the gods of Thorfast land and the touch of these gods. Their will was terrible. Either Forbear threw back his head and silently screamed at the sky. Marauders of Gore, page 245, 248. Now, I am going to do Northern and Southern. Some of you are going to go, what the hell? And I'm just going to be honest about this. The girl sitting in front of you had the same master for 10 years. He died recently, and now I'm a new master. You don't know who you're going to end up with. You made up in the North, you made up in the South. There's some striking differences between the two, and you should be trained in both. This tape will allow you to come back and check. I'm going to keep it short. It'll be about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. Then there'll be a part two that will do the other half. But that'll allow you to come back, look again. I'll put the note cards in so you can check it. Now, most of the greeting etiquette you commonly see in Gore comes from Oniisms, not from the books. What you're going to see here is the behavior and expectations as described by the books of John Norman. There's a real problem. A lot of girls come out of BDSM into Gore and end up basically bringing a lot of that stuff from BDSM. There's a lot of similarities. There's also some marked differences. And a lot of girls insist on doing their Gore as BDSM. And it doesn't work that way. This is most Sims played by the book, not by the BDSM real life or second life that you're used to. And that's why this is here. Much of the great, okay, let's go on. Beginning, quote, a slave is a slave. 1,000 customs and protocols define her. Her garment is prescribed for her. She must be of certain sorts. And I have another video describing what the garment should look like. Or if you're like me, I prescribe for my slaves what they're going to be wearing that day, which will be on another video on how to do that. She must be clearly identifiable. She must be able clearly aware and respect and employ the postures, attitudes, and positions such as required of her. Deference and obedience are essential. Two, of course, she's marked and collared. If she's displeasing, she must expect punishment. Free women never get punished. Not quite true. But in most cases, yes. But she's not a free woman. She must know how, too, to do the little things, like kiss a man's feet properly, how to bring him on all fours in her mouth to slave whip, such as domestic chores, of course, are expected of her cooking, sewing, dusting, laundering, cleaning, and so on. Perhaps the most important should be expected to serve well in the furs, which for those who are new to Gore means that you should be able to bed a man well. If she does not do so, she'll expect the strap or lash. Two, some masters think it useful to tie and whip her occasionally, even if she's a model slave, simply to remind her of what she is, that she's a slave. There are manuals on the care and management of female slaves, as there are as various other forms of stock. That was in Captives of Gore, page 349. Now, get this. There are differences from various cities, regions, and masters of gore expect of a slave as many protocols and customs commonly expect almost anywhere. In this class, we're going to go several of those expected behaviors and protocols that are pretty much common. If you go to Thyra or some of the other cities, yeah, they throw some of this out. But pretty much out of the 200 cities that exist in Second Life Gore, there is a continuity, and that's what we're going to focus on. Use common sense. No matter what situation you walk in, just imagine being in Gorian Long Hall, Philly Streets Brewery, or whatever you find yourself in. Think of what seems appropriate and realistic for the occasion. You'll make mistakes, but worse yet, you'll behave as you were taught and be scolded by the free. There are some, I'm telling you, there's some free that no matter what you do, you're wrong. Accept correction. There are jars and masters, and we are bonds or slaves. They command, we obey. Remember that. Don't expect everything to be consistent. Don't expect every situation to follow rules neatly or be choreographed to make your life pleasant. The first protocol, the first rule of survival as a slave, is to be submissive in your collar, and to the free whom you must obey. And by the way, that's all free. Yes, you'll have a master in many cases. You're still to obey the free that's in front of you. Even if your master said different, you obey the free that's in front of you. And that's a separate class, and I'll deal with that. Or you could be punished. But your job is to obey all free. Quote, how incredibly feminine they were, so lively, uninhibited, delightful, so utterly fresh, so free, so spontaneous, so open in their emotions and the movements of their body. They now moved and laughed and walked and stood as women. Pride was not permitted them. Joy was. That's from Martyrs of Glory, page 100. Now, kneeling can get a little bit confusing. There are three categories we're going to cover that are very, very important. A lot of girls mess this up, so let's go with. Quote, I saw people running down the sloping green land toward the water. Several came from the palisades. Among them, white curdled collared, exciting running bondsmaid. Upon the arrival of their master, are permitted to greet him. The men of the north enjoy the broad eyes, the leaping bodies, the squeaking, the greetings of their bondsmaid. In the field I saw an overseer clad in scarlet, with a gesture of his hand releasing the thralls, the male slaves. Then they too ran toward the water. It will be holiday. I gathered at the hall of Ivan Forkbrad, Marauders of Gore, page 129. Now, let's understand something. In the north, the way you greet your master is by jumping on him, holding on to him, and all the squeaks and things that he brought up. There is actually a HUD that allows you to jump and hold on to your master. Pretty cool. In the south, no. In the south, you're going to kneel. And there's a really good reason for that, and I'll mention that later as to why you don't kneel in the north. Quote, certain of these things, such as failing to kneel in the presence of a free man, may be regarded as a capital offense on the part of a Gorian slave, even if it's by accident. If intentional, it can involve such omissions to be occasion for death or torture. Players of Gore, page 429. Let's get this straight. The other day I was at a person's home. A slave came in without knocking, did not kneel, started talking profusely, then left without permission. When you enter the free's presence, you always drop to your knees. Now, how you drop is we're going to tell you today. But in the presence of the free, that's always the first thing. You don't kneel, he can tie you up, basically kill you on the spot. It's your choice. But that can lead to punishment. I've seen this twice this week alone, where the slaves come in, they don't kneel properly, they don't do what they should. That is a problem. Don't make that mistake. It's best to learn proper kneeling if you don't have to kneel as a bond. No one has full knowledge of what might occur in your role play. For example, well, we've already talked about that. Be well-rounded in your knowledge, because knowledge is power. And to be honest, if you decide to stay in Gore for a good long time, you'll change masters a couple of times, most likely. Quote, you'll commonly kneel in the presence of free persons, says Cabot. You'll address free men as master, free women as mistress. Instantly, in question obedience is expected of you. Commonly, you are not to speak unless you've been given permission to do so. When you speak, you should speak with softness and deference. You can own nothing. It is you who are owned. You are property, an animal, subject to buying and selling and trading, and as such, you're completely at the disposal of your master in all ways. That's in Curse of Gore, page 169. All right, let's get this straight. No, we're actually going to cover that later about speaking when given permission to. Let me make sure it gets covered and I don't mess that up. Um, the fact of the matter is, when you enter, for instance, if two men are talking and you want to do a service for them, you should always go up, wait till they finish talking, and then beg. And begging's another class. Beg to actually say, Master, may I serve you? After they finish. Never, never interrupt. Okay? Uh, always ask permission to talk. And there's another quote coming up, and I'll explain that. Free women kneeling. There are three types of kneeling. Free women kneel with their knees together, hands resting on their knees. Shawnee, would you please show that position? Not right. I'll explain what she did wrong. There's another position she needs to do. There it is. Other than the fact she's leaning sideways. I gotta quit feeding that girl Pega. She'll get it right in a second. Hopefully she'll find it. It's palms down. I think it's PD, Tower PD, palms down. There it is. Thank you. The packet I'm going to give you, ladies, or men for that matter, thralls, it's going to be labeled Tower PD, palms down. Quote, for women kneeling with the knees together, resting on their hands, hands are usually on their thighs, palms facing down. It is not true a free woman is seen to kneel before a jar. It is not true that if a woman simply kneels before a jar, she'll be collared. This is the normal sitting position of a woman. So if you have to sit down for any reason, like to listen to a lecture, to go to something, you put your palms down and kneel just like that. Quote, the Gorian male at ease usually sits cross-legged, the female kneels resting back on her heels. Priest Kings of Gore, page 63. Okay, thank you. I knew she'd get it. Now we're going to go to what position she had a second ago. Domestic woman or a tower slave kneels like a free woman with their knees together resting. However, now we're going to go back, Shawnee, to the position you were on a second ago with palms crossed as if they're ready to be tied together. Crossed together as if they're ready to be tied. That is, it's the same position, but it looks like they're can be tied up. A free woman's wrists are never so placed. That's in Priest Kings of Gore, page 63. Another quote, position of the tower slave, I said, which position she immediately assumed? Straight back, knees together, wrists before crossed as though bound. Lift your head, I said, in the tower position. The head may either bow or raise. When in doubt, the slave bows her head. Avengers of Gore, page 36, page 110. By the way, I don't think there is a position we can look up. Not within the positions you can get. If you do get the positions from me, you can install them on your collar. You don't have to keep them in gestures. You lay the collar on the ground, literally drop them in. That's if you have the collar number 9. I'm not sure about the other ones, but I know on the number 9 you can sit it down and drop the positions in, and it'll go to positions. Pleasure slaves, those whose main purpose is to please men, kneel with their knees spread. Their hands, okay, go to Nadu, please. That's the position I'm used to. Pleasure slaves whose main purpose is to please men kneel with their knees spread, their hands on their thighs, palms face down. Sometimes the slaves turn the palms face up, indicating she's basically wanting to play. We sometimes refer to the pleasure slave position as the position of Nadu. Now get this straight. If the palms are up, it means she's open to sexual advances. Of course, if you own the slave, that should be a given. If, however, you don't own her, she could have the palms face down. Okay, and then she'll let you know whether she's open or not based on the palms. Quote, the position of the pleasure slave incidentally differs from the position of both the free women and the tower slave. The hands of the slave normally rest on her thighs, but in some cities like Thesis, I believe they're crossed behind her back. Some of you have seen tower in this position, but it's only in Thesis. More significantly, for the free woman's hands may rest on her thighs. There's a difference in the placement of the knees. Priest Kings of Gore, page 64. Now, even pleasure slaves kneel in the position of tower slave in the presence of a free woman. Even pleasure slaves do tower in the presence. So if you walk into a room and there's a man and a woman, both free, you always go to tower, not nadu. Okay? And that's because you don't want to sit and expose your privates to a free woman. Always go to tower, not nadu. Quote, before women, however, she, even a pleasure slave, would commonly kneel in the position of tower slave with her knees close together. Tribesmen of Gore, page 607. Now, way you kneel has nothing to do with your silk status. It doesn't matter if you're white or red. If you're the slave that's for the pleasure of men, that's your purpose. You're a pleasure slave. Then your legs spread. If your slave is for domestic service and will serve free woman, you are to be a tower slave, knees together. Your purpose may change in various times. Your silk status doesn't. But you will be a pleasure slave in one circumstance, a tower slave in another. Okay, I want to make this perfectly clear. Bonds do not nail in the north. It's too cold. It'll damage his properties. Your knees literally be frozen. But in the south, you always kneel. In the north, you jump into their arms, make joyful noises, and then do whatever they are. Speech. Now we're going to talk about how you address the free. Quote, here, Jar, said Thara, again handing me the horn. It was filled with the meat of Thorvaslan, brewed from fermented honey and thick as sweet. The bonds made Ogla, laughing and kicking, throwing helplessly over the shores of oarsmen were carried past. I saw several, the bonds maids in the arms of Ivan's men. Among the two, some were trying to resist, were new girls. One had irritated an oarsman. Her hands held were beaten, crying out with his belt. Released, she began to kiss him, weeping. The policemen laughed. Marauders of Gore. Slaves have no rights, not even to speak. Permission is granted by the free. Now, for convenience, slaves are given a general standing permission to speak. Still, they need to make sure they don't abuse it. Quotes. Everything I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you the card for this. A slave is not to speak without permission, but many have a standing permission to speak. A permission which may, of course, be revoked at any time. For those who might be interested in such matters, the standing permission to clothe themselves is more often granted than the standing permission to speak. In my family, I tell them what I want them to put on. And there's a way to do that. That'd be in another training dealing with the female's use of the collar to help the master be able to clothe you. Okay? There's a few things more likely to convince a woman of bondage than the need to ask permission to speak, or for that matter, to get clothed. Sometimes a standing permission to speak is revoked after a few hours, or a day, and even a week. She may be better conscious. She may be better conscious and the permission is required than not be granted because she's desperate to speak. Master, may I speak? No, she's informed. She is then well reminded of her collar and mark. Conspirators of Gore, page 162. Asking in third person. This has got to be one of the most abused things in Gore. Many, many, many times, even in BDSM communities, girls are around saying this girl this and this girl that. Third person. Here's the deal. It's not in the books. Occasionally, but let me show you the difference. Quote, another of the girls was thrown over the bench as she laid on her back and her head was down. Her dark hair, long and wild, was in the weeds and reeds strewn on the floor of the hall. Her head twisted from side to side, and her eyes were closed. Her lips were parted. I saw her teeth. Do not stop, Jar, she begged. Your bondmaid begs you to stop. Marauders of Gore. Now, slaves in the book normally spoke in first person using I and me, just as any of the free would. However, a slave may be commanded to do third person, and is referred to as slave speech. Okay? Now, got that? She can be commanded, but it's not the normative. Some girls walk around, do it in BDSM, do it in gore. No, it's not the normal speech. Quote, some masters might be known to require the slave to always refer to herself in third person. For example, how may your slave serve you? Or please, master, caress your slave. On the other hand, most masters are content to please allow the slave to use personal pronouns as I beg to serve you, or please, master, caress me. Fighting Slaves of Gore, page 547. Uh, how do whatever you're commanded on this issue. But whomever you feel, you must use third person speech. Otherwise, use normal first person. Normally, a slave only uses third person speech when they're trying to convey extreme desire, for example, when begging. Quote, a judicious mix of modalities may be best. For example, suppose a slave has been somehow at fault, however inadvertently, in kneeling before the master nude must beg punishment. Consider the difference between Beverly begs to be whipped, your slave begs to be whipped, and I beg to be whipped. At one time, one might seem best. At another time, something else. Guardsman of Gorge, page 510. Okay, I'm going to end now. Reminder, I will put on here where to go get a box to get the different positions if you don't have them. Many girls don't. Okay, and there'll be a part 2 coming out that will explain how to